From the Nakba of 1948 to what is happening now in Rafah, in Gaza, in 2024, we have to ask ourselves, I believe, is history repeating itself, only this time in a perhaps even more horrible way, with massacres and ethnic cleansing? Because it was massacres and ethnic cleansing that gave birth to the State of Israel in 1948. It was triggered by a movement in the United Nations by Britain to have the region of Palestine that they held under mandate partitioned, with a tiny sliver for so-called Palestinians or Palestinian Arabs, and a large portion for a Jewish state, effectively a Zionist state, because Zionism then, as now, does not represent all of Judaism. Zionism is a supremacist ideology that both uses and abuses Judaism in a terrible way. The United Nations took this partition idea and changed a large section of that territory to Palestinians and another section, a larger section, to the so-called Jewish state.
The Jewish state will include the ports of Haifa and Tel Aviv and the whole of the Negev Valley. The Arab will occupy the fertile eastern part. Jerusalem will come under United Nations trusteeship.
Now, this was totally unacceptable to the Palestinians, I think understandably, as it was to the people and the governments of the various Arab states in the region. They announced that they would fight against this. And that led to the myth of the great David and Goliath struggle, which is still promoted by Zionists and people in Israel, about this noble, small, beleaguered Israel having to fight the mighty Goliath of the massed Arab army. Well, a simple look at just the figures of the numbers involved in that particular fight show very clearly that it was disproportionate, that the Haganah greatly outnumbered the combined so-called massed Arab armies, which were ill-disciplined, ill-supplied, completely disjointed, and could not be a match. Only one of those so-called massed Arab armies, that of Transjordan, which was controlled by the British, effectively, and where the army was headed by a British general, John Glubb.
Glubb Pasha, the British officer who has commanded the Arab Legion since 1939.
Withdrew from the struggle. They did a deal with the Zionist state over partition. Instead of giving sections of the west bank of the Jordan River to one or other side, they would get it in return for not getting involved in the fighting at all. And that is the truth of what John Glubb called the phony war. There are still a number, quite a large number, of survivors and fighters from that period on both sides. And there is a very good documentary made in 2017 called Creation and Catastrophe, which is well worth the viewing, and it is available if you really want to get detail of what happened from the point of view of the people who were there. 700,000, it is estimated, Palestinians, men, women and children, fled their homes, being gunned out by two irregular forces that the Haganah allowed to do the dirty work, the Irgun Zralumi and the Stern Gang. And they were responsible for perhaps the most well-known and notorious of those massacres at Deir Yassin. There are a number of documents that have now emerged, and Israeli and Palestinian historians have plowed through them. A number of those documents involving the Irgun, etc., are still apparently not being made available, although the 50-year period they were supposed to be kept under lock and key has long gone. We'd love to see those to find out what happened there too. But Deir Yassin needs to be looked at, and a number of historians such as Benny Morris have done just that.
Arab research in the 1980s, and occasionally there is some Arab research, serious Arab research as opposed to just propaganda, conducted by a professor from Birzeit University called Sharif Kanane. How did he look into the Deir Yassin question, the numbers? Firstly, I'm talking about the numbers. He went from refugee camp to refugee camp, village to village, to find who was left from who survived Deir Yassin, the conquest of Deir Yassin by Jewish troops on the 9th of April 1948, and worked out through the families who knew who had died in each family, how many actually died in that battle. And he found that somewhere around 100, 110 people died in Deir Yassin, which contradicted, of course, the traditional number given out both by the IZL, that is the Irgun, and the British and the Haganah, that some 250 people had died in Deir Yassin. So the number was smaller. The real number apparently was according what he found in his investigation. The number consisted mostly of women and children, the 110, not of army-age males. Most males probably fled Deir Yassin as the IZL and LHI troops, or irregulars, assaulted the village. A few died in the battle. There was a battle there which raged all day, and by the end of the battle, everybody had left except those who were dead. In conquering the village from Haganah intelligence documentation, the LHI and IZL irregulars killed women and children by throwing grenades into houses, by shooting down people who fled from houses, maybe by executing a few after they caught them. There wasn't a massacre in the sense, Uri Milstein says that there wasn't a massacre in Deir Yassin. There wasn't a massacre, and he's right in the sense they didn't take 100 people and line them up against the wall and shoot them in the back. That didn't happen. What did happen was a number of atrocities. It was a battle in which people died, and accompanying it were atrocities, a series of separate atrocities, in which a family was shot here, a family was blown up in a house there, altogether amounting to 100, 110 deaths. I would say that the word massacre is correct. By and large, a series of atrocities with several tens of people killed, not in battle, amounts to a massacre, even if it isn't the classic, lining people up along a wall and shooting them. But he says, no, this was a battle, people died in it, civilians were caught up in it and shot. So you can, take it or leave it. We don't disagree, Uri Milstein and myself, about what happened in the village. The Haganah documentation, the intelligence documentation about what the LHI and IZL did there is more or less agreed and well known. The question is one of definition. What is a massacre? What does a massacre consist of? If a lot of civilians are shot dead, more or less deliberately alongside a battle, then it's also a massacre in addition to a battle. That's my view.
Deir Yassin was not the only massacre, of course. There were a number of them. Some of them quite horrific and of which no details exist, or few details. But a number of historians, both Israeli and Palestinian, have actually managed, through getting release of some of the files of the Haganah, able to piece together what did actually happen. It is these atrocities that caused people to lose confidence in Zionism. There are a large number of people who started out as Zionists from Europe, this being a European problem, as Gabor Mate and others have made perfectly clear, and I think they're correct, that there is no real connection between Judaism and Zionism.
This conflation between Jewishness and Zionism, we don't have to separate it. It's just reality. The two have nothing to do with each other.
Zionism is a supremacist political ideology. Judaism is a religion. The Zionism uses and misuses and abuses Judaism for its own ends, even if those who are Zionists are not even practicing Jews. And there's certainly many Zionists who are, in fact, Christians. There are probably more Christian Zionists than there are Jewish Zionists. This is a fact. And it goes back to religious beliefs, mythology, etc. But on the other side, you also have groups who refer to themselves as Islamist, implying that they represent all those who are Muslims, which is equally fallacious. Islamists such as the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, there are any number of them that exist, including Hamas in terms of its original constitution, who call themselves Islamists, supporting the idea of the supremacy of Islam and therefore representing all Muslims. Totally fallacious. They should be called jihadists because they believe in the jihad, the holy war to bring about what they call an Islamic State, where, I do not know, the caliphate of the Middle East or whatever. Zionism, at least, unlike the jihadists, is a single grouping that seems to have settled on a larger Israel as being the end of it, whereas some of the jihadist groups, in particular Islamic State, see the world as being what they need to conquer, not just that part of what is still called the Middle East or the eastern side of the Mediterranean. But they are equally supremacist in terms of their ideology. They equally abuse their religions, Islam and Judaism. One of the strangest elements in this all is that the Zionists have managed to weaponize the term Semitism. Anti-Semitism was created in the 1850s in Germany. It was, yes, directed at Jews in Europe, not because of their religion, not as Christ killers, as some of the Christians tend to attack Jews on that basis. No, because they were not really Europeans. They were, in fact, Arabs, Semites. That's where it comes from. And we have this ridiculous notion of anti-Semitism, which was supposed to be anti-Arab, because the Jews were said to be Arabs. There are, of course, people who might be called Arabs, who spoke Arabic, who are, in fact, Muslim, or Jews, or Christians. The same applies right across the board. There is actually one humanity. Many religions which can be and often are used and abused. We in South Africa in particular have cases of this, where usually people who have suffered oppression, and the Afrikaners, the people of Dutch, mainly Dutch, French, Huguenot descent, etc., who set up their republics in South Africa after basically enslaving the local population, they were conquered by the British in a way which employed the first concentration camps. And that oppression of their language, etc., as well, was used to fund emotionally the Afrikaner nationalism that led to alliances with Nazi Germany and to apartheid. In the same way, oppression within Europe of Jewish people after 1939 particularly led to a boost for the Zionist ideology as a protection for Jews. It was used then by Zionist politicians and continues to be used in that way. I would say there's a Judophobia and an Islamophobia. Both are equally wrong, just as Zionism and jihadism are also dangerous to all of us and should be opposed. And they both profit from and grow out of Islamophobia and Judophobia, or so-called anti-Semitism. That is the situation today, and it is something that we should be aware of, and with that background, make the decisions, the right decisions we should make, because at the moment we're facing yet another historical tragedy. It's not a happy scene, but we should be aware of it to ensure that slogan, two-word slogan that came out of World War II after the Holocaust, never again.